Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of Secure Talk. Today, we're going to be talking to JT Taylor, who is the Senior Director of Fraud Investigations and Operations at ID.me. We're going to be talking to JT about synthetic identity theft, what it is, why should we be concerned about it, and how we can prevent it. But before we do that, let's say hi to JT. JT, how are you today?
Hey, Mark, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Hey, my pleasure. Hey, so whereabouts are you located?
So I'm coming to you today from Phoenix, Arizona.
Nice. It's probably sunny and 70.
No, it is raining and about 65 today, of all things. That's a
Wow.
rarity. It's a rarity around here, but we've gotten a lot of rain this year.
Well, actually, you guys need it. I think the whole Southwest, actually, pretty much anything in the South, but that whole, especially the Southwest, is really, what's the word? Been going through like a long, protracted drought.
You're exactly right, and it runs from all the way here, all the way over to San Diego. You're exactly right. What about yourself? Where am I talking to you at?
I'm up in Seattle, and we have no shortage of precipitation, snow, what have you. So if you come up here, I have people visiting this last week, and I get tired of the rain, but they're like, "Oh my gosh, it's so green, it's so nice." Yeah.
Well, yeah, one of my favorite cocktails is actually in Seattle, well, over towards Bellevue. But yeah, I'm familiar.
What's the name of the place?
Black Bottle.
Black
Black
Bottle.
Yeah,
Haven't been in there. I actually live in Bellevue, so
Nice.
that's got to be on my next to-do list to check that out.
Ask for the old fashioned. Yep, you're exactly
The
right.
old fashioned
Yeah.
will do. So hey, JT, before we start talking about synthetic identity theft, maybe could you just give us a little bit of info about your background and how you started to work in the fraud and investigations and operations space?
Yeah, 100%. Thanks for asking. So you're not going to find me on LinkedIn. So I retired out of the federal government where I was a special agent with the U.S. Secret Service. And then prior to that, I was an intelligence officer in the intelligence community and then transferred over to the Secret Service. So, the identity is at the heart of really what you're doing as an intelligence officer as well as a special agent with the Secret Service. Secret Service shares jurisdiction with the FBI when it comes to identity theft as well as cybercrime. So the two kind of meld together. And really, within the intelligence community, whenever you're operating in a foreign country, identity as well as what's referred to as signature analysis, basically how loud an identity is being, whether it be on the internet or whether it be operating in a foreign environment, is really paramount. So I became really aware back to an internet-enabled battlefield and let's say an internet-enabled identity back in the probably mid 2000s. And at that point, you had a number of video game platforms that were transitioning to identity, but you also had the beginnings of cryptocurrency with Second Life had one called the Al Dollar, things like this. So building out what's referred to as a personal legend, which is kind of an intelligence officer talk for an alibi, so to speak, is who are you? And building out that legend, look, you've got to be familiar with what makes up an identity. What is it that makes you, you? So that's why I came to ID.me whenever I got out. I had met our CEO back in 2014 when I was with President Obama. And I really liked the product. I liked the overall program, and I really liked the whole credentialing space. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of what brought me into the world of identity.
Excellent. And I mean, the whole world of identity theft has kind of transformed. I mean, I remember when the bad guys would get in their car and drive around and just grab stuff out of mailboxes and try to do things with that, and that was mildly annoying. But now it's gone. It's gone next generation. What are the bad guys doing to steal identity these days?
Great question. So the fastest growing version of identity theft really has to do with synthetic identity theft. I would add a close second to that is social engineering. The aspects of social engineering that make it particularly devastating is that it impacts a lot of disproportionate communities, such as or underrepresented communities, such as your elderly, minority populations, immigrants to the country. And specific to synthetic identity theft, you're normally talking about incarcerated populations, but also children get hit with it. And so those two in particular are just quite sinister with how the overall crime takes place. The Federal Reserve currently puts synthetic identity theft as the fastest growing version. And we're going to be talking a little bit today about how that takes place. But look, the national strategy for cybersecurity just came out of the White House here last week. And they put the number in 2021 at 300 million people were victims of identity theft. And that's coming out of the White House. It's a staggering, staggering number.
300 million people just in the US, because that's pretty much everybody then.
Exactly. I mean, you're right. Exactly. So in one form or another, right? I know obviously identity theft takes a number of shape, but you've just, the way I like to refer to it as, you just got to assume your information is out there based upon whether it be club memberships, whether it be getting your email leaked out onto the dark web or some type of credential. Look, 80% of hacks or data breaches these days have misuse of credentials at the heart of them, about 80%. So it goes to show you that your information's out there. And look, there's roughly about 5,200 data breaches per year. I pull that number out of the Verizon Data Breach Report. And I would ask that everybody go check that out on an annual basis. But look, if there's 52 breaches per week, chances are all of our information at one point or another is going to be in there.
Okay, so those are breaches that we have, relatively little control over because we're in somebody's database and there's not much we can do about it.
Right.
So, what are some things that organizations should be doing? And then on the flip side, what should individuals be doing?
So two things here. So I like to start with threat modeling. And threat modeling is something I picked up back at Secret Service, but you really want to understand what you're putting out there into the ether, right? So taking an inventory of what you're actually putting out, whether it be email, your phone number, who you're signing up for various services, and then also the privacy policy associated with those services. When it comes down to you going out onto the internet, you probably click a cookie statement and you move on throughout the website. And that is a lot of companies attempt to be compliant with GDPR. Well, that's fantastic, but people actually do need to read those. I was doing an interview last week and I just happened to have read the privacy policy for my local grocery store, and it had facial recognition. They were allowed to make inferences to my race, ethnicity, veteran status, my intellectual abilities. I just don't understand why a grocery store needs that. And I find it troubling how much people, they do not have informed consent when it comes to the amount of agency over their identity. And that's really where companies need to step in there, and they need to do a better job of putting privacy policies, in plain English, understand that the data that you hold can be a liability because, look, if it gets breached, you could be on the hook for that as a corporation for leaking that data out there. Also, the fact of, look, in the latest cybersecurity strategy coming out of the White House, again, they've alluded to now there will be a duty of care when it comes down to software vendors. So you're going to have to companies are going to have to start to take account for the amount of data that they're bringing in and storing, whether or not they actually use it, right? I think that's really where the credentialing space kind of fits. And IDME's done a good job of at least bringing forward the privacy to say, this is what is happening with your data. Do you consent to pick your federal agency, pick your state partner, and saying, do you consent to having this token of identity sent to them? And it's really putting the user back in control of their identity.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you saying is companies need to be more transparent in terms of what they're collecting and how they're using it. At the same time, the consumers need to be more aware and take the time to go ahead and read these privacy agreements, which nobody does. I mean, I would like to see the statistics on that. I mean, because I think you described it pretty accurately, where most people just click through as quick as possible to get, to the business at hand.
Right.
But which is pretty scary because some of those agreements, like you said, your local grocery store is collecting facial recognition data. That's
it's crazy.
Pretty crazy. Yeah. And then I'm also hearing you say on the individual side that they can use a platform or tool like ID.me to improve the security. And I have to claim ignorance here. Maybe you can walk us through how ID.me actually works.
Yeah, so it pays to go back in time to 2011. And that's when President Obama introduced the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. And basically the need there was, how can you go online, do a secure transaction, and not lose your identity in the process. The strategy called to the idea that many more secure transactions, banking, interacting with your local government or federal government, were happening more online and less in person. Okay, so it called for basically the use of a credential that you would go on and complete these secure transactions. Now, it's important to note this is not to say you require this credential to go online. No. The credential is meant to be able to assert your identity online in a trusted manner, right? So it's that trust factor. Now, back during that time frame, so this is 2011 when that strategy came out, Jeremy Grant, that is over at the Better Identity Coalition, was really paramount in writing out how the federal government could foster this environment through what's known as a public-private partnership. And really the idea being that federal agencies would accept this credential, and then also the private partners would go out and create the credential and create this identity platform to do the verification. And that's really what ID.me took and ran with. And in 2014, NIST came out with, hey, here's the credentialing plan. And here is the strong identity credentials that you can create to go assert your identity online. The strong one that we at ID.me are famous for and a market leader in is what's known as the IAL2 credential. So that means Identity Assurance Level 2. What we're doing is we're marrying up an identity, right? So your name, your social, your date of birth, what have you. And we're marrying that to something that you have, such as a MFA, a cell phone device, and then also a trusted secret therein. So whenever you come onto the platform, you can get a code sent to your phone, much like that you do with online banking. And that allows you to go and interact. Look, we're at 12 federal partners, 30 different states, 36 state agencies, 40 healthcare partners, and 500 brands. You can use that one credential at all of those without having to go and log in at all those various platforms.
So it's basically is it a single sign-on type functionality as well? Or I mean, once you have that, I have access to all those different platforms, or do I still need a separate ID to log in with, or am I using the ID.me credential to log in?
Great question. So the credential itself is completely portable. However, depending on the partners, different states, different federal agencies have different requirements for the credential itself. Mm-hmm. From an ID.me perspective, the credential is completely portable. You can go to all these various services. However, a state may require you to go ahead and log onto their platform, depending on how they've integrated ID.me. We integrate with all the open protocols. So depending on how they've got us integrated, they may ask you to do an additional verification check. But most of the time, it's just a single sign-on.
Okay. So as an example of a use case here, I want to go to a certain government agency and maybe I want to pay my property taxes. I want to go to another agency and maybe apply for benefits or something like that. And I can just use this credential, and I don't, other than maybe doing an MFA or something, I don't really need to do any extra kind of authentication.
Exactly. And you're not having to remember all these different username and passwords, right? So the use case here, I just went through it this morning. Being a veteran, I logged on to Veterans Affairs. I logged onto my account. I refilled a prescription. I took that. I then had to go over to the Internal Revenue Service to pull down my Get transcript so that I could pay my taxes this year, being a good citizen. Mm-hmm. And I did that all in one seamless time. I didn't have to log in and have all these different username and passwords. I go, I complete, the IRS honors my IL2 credential, takes it in, good to go.
So just like any other type of identity theft, where people can go out and, create an alias or create a copy of your identity and start applying for different benefits, what prevents these, bad actors from going ahead and creating a false ID.me credential? Other than the fact that, like you said, that they're going to authenticate against something that you have, but if they can convince the ID.me platform that, hey, this is my phone or this is my SMS number, etc., I guess that still could be an issue.
Absolutely. I mean, and what we've seen out of the authentications of old that I'm sure most of your audience is familiar with, let's talk knowledge-based answers. Hey, Mark, you lived on such and such street whenever you were 12. What was it? Things like this. That type of information, especially post Equifax hack, is out on the dark web, right? The fact that you would depend on that as an authentication mechanism for any type of, let's say, secure government benefit or secure state benefit, that should be the furthest thing from the would-be decision maker's mind. It just doesn't work anymore. So what you need to do is really test for depth of an identity. So what we're doing, at least on the ID.me side, it's a lot more advanced than anything associated with the KVA, is we're going to be tying that particular cell phone, in this case, to your question, to the actual account holder. We're doing that through authoritative resources such as the telcos themselves. So we're going to be testing for SIM tenure. So we want to see how long that you've been associated with that SIM. And of course, this is all happening within about 200 milliseconds. But the reason why we're doing that is you might have been a victim of a SIM swap, right? So
I was just going to ask you about that.
Yeah, look, it's a terrifying instance. If anybody's ever been a victim of a SIM swap, whenever you go to turn on your phone and all of a sudden it doesn't make calls anymore, the battery's draining very quickly. We've even had some insider threat issues associated with telcos recently. So you might have a would-be insider threat at a cell phone provider that is actively allowing your SMS to get taken over. With that being said, we're going to pick that up on the ID.me side because we're going to be looking for how long you've been associated with that particular SIM, or has there been recent port activity? Now we look for a time period associated with that, and we combine all this with a device fingerprint. We align that with financial records. So how long has Mark been associated with this identity? And is there consistency and depth to it? Instead of your synthetic identity, which has a synthetic identity theft where I combine real PII and fake information, it's not going to align in our system. So that's really why ID.me is at the head of the synthetic identity theft defense market.
Awesome. And I just learned a new term, SIM tenure. I like that. So,
Thanks, man.
no, that's good. I mean, it's funny because that was going to be my next question, was about SIM swapping, and you've already answered that. So that's awesome. So should everybody out there go ahead and register for an ID.me credential, or do you have to be part of an organization, or you have to be, how does it work?
One, I think so. Obviously, I'm a little biased, but let's talk about why you would. Okay.
Okay.
If you want to go to all these various federal services that we're partnered up with and we provide authentication services for. So again, that's those 12 federal agencies right now, 30 state agencies, or excuse me, 30 states, 36 state agencies. So there's that reason alone. But even more, we give you that opportunity to assert your identity securely online. Additionally, you will absolutely love our privacy policy. We don't sell, trade, rent data, full stop. What's neat about that is whenever you're going to the IRS, if you're going to the VA, you're going to state of Virginia, whatever you're doing, a screen will pop up and it'll say, Mark, you are going to be sharing your name, social, email with this particular partner, whether it be the state, federal agency, et cetera. Are you okay with that? You click yes, and then it sends the data. That's how powerful it is to be able to say, I know exactly who is getting my data and I know why. I want them to have my data so that I can go get my stated benefit. Additionally, some brands, again, we have about 500 brands, Apple, Amazon, et cetera. Some brands use us just because they want to offer specific discounts to specific groups, whether that be nurses, teachers, police officers, military. And they want to identify who's in a specific group and then offer them whatever type of discount. So that's, again, a benefit for the corporation to adopt us so that they can get that trusted identity associated with a stated benefit program.
Excellent. Well, then how does this get paid for?
Oh, great question. I haven't gotten that one. Thank you very much for asking that. But it actually takes me back to President Obama and the national strategy. It's actually the reason why you don't have the credentialing environment the way that it was initially set out to be, and as far as growth was. In 2011, the idea being that every person would have this trusted credential that you'd be able to go out and go to the post office with, go to the IRS, et cetera. What happened was it became too expensive for the government to implement. At first, the government was going to pass on the cost to banks because the banks wanted that solution to be able to know who they were dealing with for know your customer rules, anti-money laundering rules. The banks balked at the price, and then government agencies balked at the verification, at actually saying, I don't want to do the identity verification because that's going to cost us money. So there was a great study back in 2017, 2018, how much it would cost the Internal Revenue Service to generate one of these IL2 credentials. Okay. So if they did it over the phone, it was going to be $58 per credential. All right. If they did it in person, like at a taxpayer assistance center, it was going to be $89 according to the Government Accountability Office. ID.me is doing that same thing, that same credential, and it's about 5x below the $50 cost. I mean, it's very cheap. And how we make money is that whenever you come onto the platform, these various agencies and state partners that we have as partners, they in turn are buying a block of verifications because they are in the business of knowing who's on their network, but we're doing it for them far cheaper than the $50 or $80. And they get the benefit of having access and equity for their network. They're dealing with a trusted identity that they're not going to be dealing with the fraud that came out of the pandemic. And they know exactly who they're dealing with when it says, I'm going to send this benefit to this person, and I know who they are. They're an actual constituent. So what's really neat from a cost savings wise is, let's say that I've only verified with one partner. Let's say I'm just a IRS customer. I go into ID.me, I create my IL2 credential, I then go to IRS. Well, then let's say I want to go to Apple and I want to go or get a discount from Apple, and I want to get a discount, or I want to take advantage of a state benefit in the state of Colorado, let's say. All that has to happen there from an Apple and Colorado side, you're taking advantage of a verification that's already done. It's pre-verified is what it's referred to as. So you pay a much more even further discounted rate for that verification, and you only pay it the one time.
Sounds like an amazing service. Do you track activity? I think you might have covered that earlier, but like if I'm on there and on ID.me and I'm getting some sort of discount from Apple, and then I bounce over and use a different government agency, or as you mentioned, fulfill a prescription, is that activity tracked somehow?
No, and I'll tell you why. It would actually violate the terms of service. So currently, a lot of services within the data broker space that do authentication, that activity is tracked and aggregated and then sold off. That's the purpose for that, right? You want to be able to market to those folks if you're in the data broker space. However, on the ID.me side, we're in the credentialing space only. So with that being said, there's no type of trading or selling or renting of the data, nor your spending habits or wherever you're going to online.
So it's a great, I guess, user experience for the consumer. And then on the government agency or corporate side, how would ID.me, and I'm asking this because I probably can already guess at it, but how would ID.me have prevented some of the fraud that took place during the pandemic of people claiming benefits that weren't theirs? I mean, some of those guys walked away with hundreds of millions of dollars. The state of Washington alone processed close to $400 million. This is just the state level of unemployment claims, which is kind of crazy. Yeah. I mean, no flags were raised at all, during the time when they were writing the checks. So how would ID.me or a platform similar to ID.me prevent that?
Well, look, and thank you for bringing it up. And I'll tell you, I'm happy to go into this. It's rather crazy stories that we look back on the COVID years, and obviously it impacted everybody so differently, and everybody has their own story when it comes to COVID, but it's getting lost. Just the hundreds of billions of dollars, billions with a Bravo, with a B, were lost during the pandemic. The latest testimony that came out of the Inspector General for the Department of Labor, he put it at Inspector General Turner, he put it at $191 billion. And he put a fraud rate on it of about 21%. So from the Department of Labor side, they're saying one for every $5 went to a fraudster during the pandemic. So of the $877 billion that was printed, 1 out of every 5 went to fraud. That's a staggering statistic.
It's depressing as heck, man. Especially because as we were discussing, it's tax season and we're writing a check to the government, and I'm like, okay, well.
Yeah, I'll tell you though. So during the pandemic, ID.me was adopted by 26 states. So whenever the first program was put out for the unemployment checks, the Department of Labor lifted one critical thing. They wanted the checks to get out to people because people were in need, right? So they lifted the identity verification portion. Now, ID.me adopted 26 states in a very short time span. The current ID.me network today is over 100 million people. And at that time, we went through this hyper growth period because a lot of states were saying, oh my gosh, we've got this fraud problem. We need to bring somebody in. The currently, right now, there's 6 states that publicly, they went out at the state level and publicly identified ID.me as preventing $240 billion in fraud. And that's public awareness campaigns, public news. That's not ID.me marketing talk. 6 states, $240 billion. It's an incredible number. With that, if you go and the Department of Labor study that says, okay, well, it's a fraud rate of about 21%. If you look at their methodology that they used, they only looked at 4 states. So what they did was they took 4 states and they said, okay, well, in these 4 states, we had about a 20% fraud rate. So we're going to apply that same fraud rate across every state. Okay. ID.me, like I said at the time, had 26 states. So we're in a little bit more unique position to say really how much fraud there was, because we were seeing different states set us up differently. And so we were seeing fraud happen in real time if you consider the fact that maybe the state didn't want these more strict IL2 controls. Maybe they wanted a softer LOA3 integration, right? And now if you go to the IL2 rates, it just shuts down fraud completely. I mean, it really does a great job of getting at the fraud. And NIST was well ahead of their time whenever they planned this out. But we would probably, I would ask your audience and yourself, Mark, go Google Road to Losing $400 Billion by our CEO. He puts it, there's charts, there's great math in there and the formulas. You can go check out pandemicoversight.gov as well. And it just shows you the amount of money that was printed and sent out, as well as the established fraud rate. The over on the road to losing.
Just in case you're not depressed enough, go ahead and read these articles.
Yeah, I mean, look.
Just for a little morning pick-me-up,
Just for a little morning pick-me-up. Yeah, look, Mark, in all seriousness, man, $877 billion went out to unemployment across 3 programs. ID.me lays out on that road to losing $400 billion, where it's probably closer to about $400 billion went to fraud. And what we could have done with that money, who knows, right? I mean, I pay attention to the homelessness within the state of Arizona, and they put the number to solve homelessness here locally at $8 billion. And I'm like, oh my gosh, a lot of this fraud money went overseas, and it is depressing. It is depressing. But getting back to your original question, talking about how brands can incorporate us and prevent fraud. We had a really great case study that happened with a very large tech company that had employed us to identify teachers. And they wanted to offer a discount to teachers in the classroom. And what was happening, they were getting people that were coming on and abusing basically they had before they had ID.me, the threat actor here had submitted fake documents to this tech company and said, I'm eligible for this discount. That person would then go in and buy thousands of dollars in tech equipment and then sell it out on the open market for a small write-up, for a small markup. Now, once they came in with ID.me, we have a document fraud program where we're doing the OCR pulls. We're looking for any type of forgeries, things like that. And they're able to shut that down and also see that they had a lot of existing fraud already in their system. That's really the benefit of coming into the ID.me network, is you're not just getting fraud that occurs on your network. If I've got a fraud or threat actor that's attacking the Internal Revenue Service from, let's say, Russia, I can take those same signatures, those same exploits that are attempting to be used, and I can apply that across the network and say, who else could be hit with this?
Well, I mean, it sounds like kind of a no-brainer for large organizations and government agencies who are interacting with their constituents via the internet. What pushback do you get? I mean, why aren't all government agencies and all large retail type organizations on using ID.me?
Look, I'll tell you, we excel in the equity, access, and security side. Where I see the pushback, and I wish I would have really thought about this more as a cybersecurity practitioner. I would tell your audience, as well as you, Mark, we've got to meet people where they are in their technical journey. And we don't do a good job, at least in the tech space, of meeting people where we put out every October in Cybersecurity Awareness Month, we'll say, hey, MFA authentication, encrypt your data, make backups for ransomware, things like this. And what we don't do is we don't take time to individualize it and say, this person may not, and I don't want to harp on any of the politicians that I protected back in the Secret Service, but one of them back in 2016 asked me if I knew how to turn on their iPhone. we've got to be prepared to make our technology accessible to everyone. Where
Mhm.
ID.me is excelling is we're really good at verifying the unbanked, as an example. People that haven't had a bank account because they don't trust the banks, or they're in a underrepresented community and they just don't have a credit profile. And with that, they were getting left behind, and a lot of verification systems, particularly on the data broker side, were leaving those folks behind. And whenever ID.me stepped in, it's not just a credit profile that you need, right? Now we can go throughout this whole individual and take this whole person concept and apply it to a verification. However, I'll tell you where some scary stuff in the pushback comes. It's people thinking that these are an attack on civil liberties, where, hey, my data's already out there. Or last year, famously, with the facial recognition piece, where we did have a facial recognition program where we were doing one to N, and a lot of people were saying, look, this falsely identifies certain populations, and we want to stop using it. So we stopped using it. And we've got to be more cognizant as security professionals that we need to meet folks where they are in their technical journey. And that some of these technologies are quite intimidating. I think we get trapped in our bubble of talking in a room and saying like, oh yeah, we're going to come up, we're going to innovate here, we're going to bring this forward, not understanding that some people just aren't ready for that.
Well, I guess it makes a lot of sense. But are you saying that the government agencies that aren't on board with ID.me yet, that's what they're saying is, hey, our constituents, they're not ready for something like this, and so we're not ready either. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, interesting. So I'll tell you, the National Cybersecurity Strategy came out last week, and then 3 days later, GSA, right? This is the main supplier for all of the federal government. The GSA Inspector General did a report where Login.gov, which is the government solution to online credentialing, they had to admit due to the IG report that they had misled other federal agencies for identity verification services. I mean, this is crazy. You've got a government agency quite literally lying to another federal agency about their capabilities. And if we can't just have one conversation about, hey, implement an IL2 credential, let's have a shared space, give options out to the greater public, and have people make a choice on who they want to mint their credential with, and then go forth and conquer. So I don't think we're doing a good job there, especially from a federal side of the house. I'm glad that the White House and Congress is all about digital identity right now. I'm glad it's getting attention. We're in a very interesting spot in terms of the political environment where digital identity is at the forefront because of all the fraud that occurred during the pandemic. But then whenever you've got the main vendor within the government lying to other federal agencies about being compliant with federal standards, that's not a good look.
Government agency not telling the truth? All right, I'm not going to go there. Hey, so it's funny because I'm reading a book right now. It's called The Ministry of the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson, and it's kind of like a historical fiction, but it's looking forward instead of looking back. And it's written as a nonfiction book, but I don't know, it's somewhat a lot based in reality and future capabilities and so on. One of the topics that is often discussed in the book is a sovereign identity. And it sounds a little bit like, what ID.me is providing, but there's probably some key differences there. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are in terms of achieving some type of sovereign identity, using a blockchain that allows people to kind of own and manage their identity, and in a fully, encrypted, secure manner, quote unquote. And then, in this book, it even goes on farther and says, once you own your identity, then you have the ability to let your identity be marketed to, instead of data brokers selling your identity and making profiting amongst themselves. You have the ability to allow yourself to be marketed to, and you receive revenues from the agencies who are trying to target you. So it's a pretty cool concept. But if we just go back to the sovereign identity versus the ID.me solution, or if there are any, what are the major differences?
I'm going to have to get what was the Ministry of what?
The Ministry of the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. Yeah.
I'm a big reader. That's going to be awesome. That sounds. I got to take you back to 2014. Whenever I first met our CEO, he was at a veterans incubator for startups. His name's Blake Hall. And he was briefing President Obama, who at the time was, of course, this is all about digital identity during this time.
You're going to say, was at the time trying to figure out how to turn on his iPhone? Sorry.
It was not him. It was not him. Not him.
Okay. Okay, good.
Yeah, that was not him. At any rate, so Blake was briefing President Obama on credentialing and trusted identities in cyberspace. And I remember him saying a customer that uses their credential at a would-be partner should get some type of rebate for consenting to that partner. And what ID.me has done is that vision where you can participate in cashback programs at various partners. If you go in there and create an identity, what have you, whether it be buying a mattress, buying a pillow, whatever you're doing. But there's various partners. There's over 500 partners on the community side. And with that, you're getting that rebate back for consenting and using your identity with that vendor. So that's a first crack at that. I really, really like that concept. It's the second time I've heard it discussed. You're the second and Blake's the first. So I do like that concept as well. Specific to blockchain.
I think a lot of people would like it because, I mean, right now, I mean, we got the data brokers, but we also have the credit reporting agencies without our permission. And oftentimes, based upon erroneous reporting, they can really mess with people's lives, right? And then you have the marketing, the data brokers who are profiting from something that we should own. I mean, if we take the European standpoint, that data is ours. Right. So why is it that they can, without any permission? And I know America's kind of the Wild West in terms of, consumer rights and all that kind of stuff. And it seems to be that there's some momentum kind of growing in terms of protecting, our personal data. But I think we have a long ways to go.
Yeah. First on that real quick, I'll tell you, we're missing a federal data privacy law, quite frankly. And ID.me threw some weight behind it last year, trying to get that passed. It was in Congress. Mark, I would challenge you and your audience, go look at, ID.me did a great write-up on why we need one, and go look at who's spending to not get that through. It's not a pretty picture. And I would also tell you that there's states that have done a great job, at least at taking steps towards data privacy, right? You're in one of them, Mark, right? And I appreciate the fact that states are taking the lead here and saying, hey, we got to do something to control this data. Additionally, that makes it for a very non-competitive environment when, if you're a small business, well, there's no federal guideline for me to adhere to unless you're conforming to PCI or GDPR. But what does a would-be small business do whenever they've got customers in Washington, Illinois, Colorado, and California? They've got to conform to all those state data privacy laws. And that's a very, very expensive proposition, as you can imagine. So that's the first part of that. The idea that you're going to ask a small mom and pop business to adhere to those is just kind of outlandish. So I would really like to see the federal government take the lead and pass a data privacy law. And kind of with that, there was a really great, the FTC fined a data broker last year. And one of the key takeaways that I took out of that is that the average data broker has roughly 300 data points on every American, every single American. With that, there was one really just crazy highlight out of there, and it was highlighting the fact of they had it broken down at the data broker level for elderly and gullible. And they would take that list of elderly and gullible, and then they would sell that to online gambling sites. And I'm like, what kind of a world are we living in where we're monetizing this? It hints at, I don't like where that industry is heading, and it's not getting any better. And so now more than ever, I'd like for people to assert their own identity.
Well, and then you throw in social engineering and some of the AI-based tools that allow for not just voice recognition, but dubbing and voice impersonation. And you get these elderly and gullible who get a phone call from their long lost grandson saying, "Hey, grandma, I need some help," and it is pretty scary. But I think that, God, we got to do a better job of educating everybody. and like you said,
Yeah.
meeting people where they are. How does ID.me help with, or does it help with any of the issues related to voting?
Not yet. And this country more than others. There are identity verification platforms in other countries that handle voting. This country is not one of them. Any type of voter ID law has previously been shut down in Congress before, but currently ID.me does not do any type of partnership with voting.
Okay, interesting. So let me just kind of close this up then. Just talking to consumers out there, what are like one or two, three things that they should do today to kind of go out and protect their identity?
Okay, here's what I want people to do. And again, it's going to sound like I'm biased, but this is what I would do as my plan of attack. I'm going to create an ID.me IL2 account. Why am I going to do this? I want to see if somebody is asserting my identity online without my permission. Has somebody tried to take my identity or have taken my identity? And if so, ID.me has an outlet for you where we're going to help you rebuild your identity if somebody did steal your identity out there. Okay. So go to ID.me, create an IL2 credential. Again, log on there. It's very seamless, pretty seamless transaction. Doesn't take more than a few minutes. So that's the first thing. Second, in your daily lives, what are you putting out there that can identify you? It's no longer name, social security number, date of birth. It's how long have you had your current cell phone number? It's your IP address from your house that you're connecting to the internet with. It's the grocery store that you shop at. All of these things are being actively monetized, aggregated by data brokers out there. While you did mention, and I was telling you how ID.me does not integrate with voting, it should stand to reason that data brokers do have that information. Data brokers do know your political affiliation. They do market to you accordingly like that. So recognize what you're putting out there. And also with that, the social media side of the house. I mentioned at the top that I do not have a LinkedIn account. It is nothing against any of the social media platforms, though I think they do need some identity verification. I'm sure Elon Musk does as well, but I digress. It's just the fact that there is a lot of nation state actors on these platforms that are attempting to subvert trust in American democracy. And with that, people need to understand that, yes, America does become the target of attacks from nation state actors, your Russias, your Chinas, near peer competitors, as it were, but also recognize that the most important part of a democracy is the trust from the constituent to the government. And if that is broken, that is really the foundation of democracy that goes away. So we're all a part of this, and we need to demand that we take control of our identity.
I think those are some excellent points. Great advice. And I also like the commentary, on the importance of trust in democracy. And I think we can all do our part to kind of foster or increase or improve that trust, because really it's taken a big hit these days. And even if it's just saying, hey, you know what, we have confirmation or high degree of trust that this person is who they say they are, and that our identity is not going to be compromised. That's just one piece of the puzzle that is being fixed. So thank you for your time, and thank you and the rest of the ID.me team for what you guys are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a dedicated team of engineers, data scientists, and investigators that are truly all about protecting Americans. So thank you. Thanks for having us. Hey, Mark, you didn't ask me for any book recommendation. You better ask me.
Well, I'm asking, what's the book recommendation?
All right. So people, you talk a lot about leadership, which is why I like this podcast a whole lot. I appreciate that, especially in a tech space, right? And I want people to check out Team of Rivals. That is The Genius of Abraham Lincoln. That's by Doris Goodwin. And also, please check out Team of Teams, New Rules of Engagement for a Complex World by General Stanley McChrystal.
Awesome. Team of Teams. Hey, and just, now we're on this topic. You did mention, I don't know if it was a newsletter or some type of org that right at the top of the podcast that you said is a great information source.
Yeah, I tell you though, do go out and check out fcw.com. So that's where Jeremy Grant wrote an article in reference to, he's part of the Better Identity Coalition, came out of Venable. He was also an author of that National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. He wrote an article, an op-ed last week in FCW, which is where they publish a lot of news op-eds on government technology. He did a great write-up on the GSA debacle when they were lying to federal agencies.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that tip, and I appreciate the book tips as well. Hey, JT, it's been great talking with you.
You too, Mark. Thanks for having me again. Appreciate it.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.